Welcome to Money RX for CRNAs and nurse practitioners. I'm Brett Fellows, certified financial planner. And today's guest is Kristin Burton. Kristin is a practicing critical care physician assistant, entrepreneur, educator, and founder of Millionaires in Medicine. And now she is the author of the new book, The PA Millionaire Path. Kristin has paid off over $160,000 of student loan debt in just 16 months and became a self-made millionaire by age 31 through intentional investing, disciplined saving, and strategic financial planning. Now, through her platform, Millionaires in Medicine, she now helps healthcare professionals build wealth, reduce their financial stress, and ultimately create more freedom in their lives and careers. Kristin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Brett. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I first off, I'm really excited to have you here. And as we were talking online, as you know, I've enjoyed following your content for a while now and just seeing the conversations that you're creating around money in medicine. And I honestly think healthcare professionals desperately need these discussions. So to kick us off, for those who don't know, I'd love for you to share the story behind Millionaires in Medicine as it exists today. When you started that, what was the mission and who are you ultimately trying to help?
I started Millionaires in Medicine in 2019 out of really genuinely a word of mouth. Hey, I'm a PA. I have created some financial progress for myself. And I had friends and colleagues just asking how. And it really started like that, of just spreading in a very grassroots style information about what it actually looks like to succeed with money as a PA. When I graduated PA school in 2016, there was really nothing speaking to anyone in medicine outside of physicians. And there's a lot of them, of course, right? And their personal finance content tends to dominate the landscape, but things look different for PAs, for NPs, for pharmacists, or some of these other medical professionals, and there just wasn't anything for us. And so very slowly, I started building a website and then a social media platform, and ultimately kind of created what we have today, which is a platform that specifically helps non-physician medical professionals like PAs and NPs and pharmacists and CRNAs have content or resources that's driven towards their income trajectory, their student loan burden, their professional development, so that we feel like we have a seat at the table at the conversation.
Gotcha. And is it just you now as it sits today, or do you have other team members?
I do have other team members. It was just me for a long time. The solopreneur thing, it's fun, but it's work. No, at this point, I have a team of just under 10 folks that are a mix of clinicians and non-clinicians. And we kind of, as a group, pull this whole thing together. So we have pharmacists, we have PAs, and then folks that do, non-clinical skills like help put social media stuff together and editing podcasts and all that kind of jazz.
So what surprised you the most about, let's say, the financial struggles of high income earners over those last 5 years going through the Millionaires in Medicine?
I actually think what surprised me the most is that most people like me, like a PA, for example, they don't identify themselves as a high income earner. When they hear stuff like that, they feel like that doesn't actually apply to them. It's interesting because if you look at the numbers, right, just for national median household income, we are high income earners. But somewhere along the way, I think it's the combination of not being the highest earner in the room, right? When you are at work surrounded by people earning 500,000, 700,000 plus. And then also feeling like the student loan debt ends up being such a financial drag that you don't have extra left over at the end of the month. Those two things in conjunction, I think, really shape the mindset around money for PAs, NPs, pharmacists in a negative way. And it takes some really intentional thought process to kind of break through that initial hesitancy of feeling like I don't even have the income required to build wealth. How would someone like me do that?
And how much time does this take for you? So you're a practicing PA and you've got this Millionaires in Medicine. Is it 50-50? Is it 25-75? How does your world work like that?
I will say I'm part-time clinically. I have been for the last 4 years. And in my head, it doesn't always work out exactly like this, but in my head, my time is
Sure.
kind of split a third, a third, a third. I spend like a third of my
Okay.
time, honestly, with my kids, just like at home on a Tuesday
Yep.
going to the zoo. And then about a third of my time clinically practicing, and about a third of my time doing this.
And
There are
then there's the
seasons where it ebbs and
podcast
flows,
too.
but
Yeah, there are
go ahead.
seasons, absolutely. And
Yeah.
what about the podcast? So, when did you decide to launch the podcast, and what motivated you to start that?
So I've been doing short form content for a long time, but it is very hard to communicate with people in a
Mm,
meaningful way in a 60-second clip or in an infographic. And so I really
yeah.
wanted to have a way to actually communicate like more in-depth concepts and really like shape thought processes, which can only happen
Hmm.
in long form content. And so I decided to launch the podcast, which we usually co-post on YouTube, earlier this
Okay. Yep.
year so that we could have deeper conversations than what you can have on Instagram, where the expectation is
Yeah.
short attention span. I'm going to
Right.
capture this in 15 seconds and move on.
And are most of those episodes kind of interview type of thing? You bring in somebody to talk about a topic? Is it one of the 10 of you that is part of Millionaires in Medicine? How do you come up with content for the show?
It's a 50-50 split. We usually
Yeah.
have a guest every other episode, and some of those
Hmm.
guests are financial industry professionals. Some of them
Hmm.
are medical professionals who've had success in a certain arena, whether it be financial or professional development. And so we do about half like that. And then the other half are usually either me or me plus a team member. So one of the gals on the team
Hmm.
is a clinical pharmacy specialist by training, but she's actually sat through the same program that, like, for example, a CFP would go through if they wanted to be a certified student loan consultant in addition.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
her knowledge base of student loans way outpaces even mine. And so a lot of times we'll sit and
Yeah.
do kind of Q&A or talk about the latest and greatest change, right, that's come to federal student loans, just to keep people
Yep.
informed and feeling like they're on the forefront of knowing what's happening.
Okay. And so we've got social media, short form content, you've got longer form content. Either one of those draw your attention more? Which do you like doing better?
Absolutely long form content. If you knew me in
Yes.
real life, like I hate social media. I would never be on it. I
Uh-huh.
never use
Same.
any of my personal
Same.
accounts. It's like it
Yeah.
drives me nuts. The attention span piece drives me nuts.
That's funny.
And I feel like you can't really communicate a true financial principle because there's always nuance. And in a little post, you
Yes.
can't capture that. And so for me, it's long
Yes.
form content all day.
And not to go down a marketing rabbit hole, but we all think, oh, we should do Instagram posts, LinkedIn connections,
Yep.
YouTube video, podcast. Have you found that at the end of the day, there's really one main driver? Is it the podcast, that sort of thing?
No, actually, most of the people that come into our world from short form content on Instagram. We have a lot of
Interesting.
free
Okay.
stuff that we'll put out, free resources for very
Yeah.
specific issues. And then most people actually learn, I think, the most in our email community, where we're
Interesting.
sharing with them the podcast episodes, we're sharing with them the YouTube
Yep.
resources, recordings of master classes and things like that, plus some longer form actual information via email. And so the combination of that,
Yep.
I think, is actually where most of the people come from that ultimately learn the most from us or work with us is through that pathway.
And you mentioned it briefly there, but yeah, you're also a mom of two, which I think a lot of listeners are going to relate to. So this third, a third, a third. How in the world do you manage all of it without yourself feeling so completely overwhelmed?
Well, some days you do that better than others.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think for me, the thing that helps me the most is that I am pretty good at having a long-term lens. And so pretty
Mm.
quickly into me having small children, I realized when I'm 50, 60, 70 years old, I will be quite comfortable if my business didn't grow at the maximum scale I possibly could have done. I will not be comfortable if my children didn't have any time with me and I didn't get to watch their childhood. And so pretty early
Yeah.
on, it was like, okay, I have the workaholic tendency. Personally, I could probably put in 80
Mhm.
hours a week all the time and be fine, but that's not the long
Gotcha.
term goal. And so I have learned how to put very firm constraints around business time and
Okay.
honestly around what I will work clinically in order to make sure
Good
that
for
I
you.
leave space for the stuff that actually matters.
Good for you. That's not easy. So I was going to ask, like, what do you say no to? But you've kind of explained that a lot, I'm sure. So that's hard to do. So good for you. And if all of that wasn't enough, one of the reasons we are here today, and you and I are talking, is to celebrate the launch of your new book, which came out yesterday, the PA Millionaire Path. So, what compelled you to write the book?
I think it's along the same line of feeling like I wanted to connect with people in a way that was much deeper than a social media post. And I
Uh,
wanted something that felt longer lasting, right? Like you can look up the half-life of an Instagram post or a podcast episode or a YouTube video, and even the platforms that have a better quote half-life of content, like the stuff doesn't last, right? It goes out into space and people consume
yeah.
it, that's it. I wanted something that was tangible and felt like it was going to sit there for a while and be an enduring
Mm,
resource and something people might turn back to over and over again. And so the idea of creating a book has been honestly on my mind for a while, but I had just decided in
interesting.
2026, this is the year that I get it done and get it out.
Okay.
And I set
Okay.
an unreasonable timeline to do that. I'd never written a book and I had no idea how much work it would be.
Uh-huh.
But once the timeline was
Uh-huh.
set, it was like, man, we're doing it. And so I just figured it out.
Love it. Love it. Good for you. And I was fortunate enough to get an early copy of the book, and I generally thought it was, as I've mentioned to you, really well done. And I think what I appreciated most about it was how practical and approachable you made these topics for otherwise busy healthcare professionals. So I'd love to spend the next part, maybe, of our conversation walking through some of the biggest takeaways I had from the book. I'll kind of put you on the spot. Is that okay?
Sure.
So awesome. To kick us off, I think one thing I have learned over the past 20 years as a certified financial planner is that doing well with money has very little to do with how smart you are and so much to do with how you behave. And honestly, and if you've learned this too, behavior is really hard to teach, even to very smart people like PAs. And so I love something you wrote really early in the book, and I'm quoting here, kind of, your money mindset is foundational. And no matter how good the plan is on paper, it will always be filtered through beliefs that you carry about what you deserve, what's possible for you, and whether you're actually capable of achieving it. So, Chris, I'm interested. Why do you think mindset and behavior play such a powerful role in financial success, especially for high achieving healthcare professionals like PAs?
For me, honestly, it was the key that unlocked everything in terms of the asset building side. It's easy to kind of have a budget and be able to keep yourself afloat, so to speak, financially, and maybe, get yourself to a point where you are saving consistently. But doing some of the stuff that requires like a little bit extra or a little outside, just like, investing in a 401k or 403b, it requires
Hmm.
the acceptance of a little bit of risk and the willingness to understand that, like, I'm gonna fail. That's okay. It doesn't define me as a person, and I am worthy of reaching for it. And so for me, like,
Yeah.
being able to go from the basic stuff to feeling like I have the ability to increase my income. I have the ability to go out and buy a short-term rental, or I can figure out how to do due diligence on this syndication. All of that stuff started with me first looking at like what I believed I was capable of achieving. But even a step before that, actually going like, yeah, I am capable of building wealth. And not only am I capable
Hmm.
of it, I would be a good steward if I was able to do that. And I trust myself that if I were able to accumulate some wealth, that I would be generous in the process, that I would think about not just me, but generations to come. And having like
Hmm.
those internal conversations at the very beginning, that actually really shaped the journey far more than any like particular tactic or strategy.
And you find, or have you found over these last 5, 6 years, what limiting beliefs are pretty prevalent among medical professionals? Is it similar to what you were thinking?
Yes, there's a laundry list. But honestly,
Yeah.
one of the very foundational ones is that my income is limited. There
Yeah.
are, pay scales for PAs, and there are a lot of people that just feel like, hey, look, I'm always going to fall in the bell curve, and that's that. And the
Yeah.
idea that I'm ever going to push myself into what most PAs would consider, or NPs, a high earning bracket feels far-fetched. Honestly, one of the other big ones is just feeling like, hey, I am not a quote high earner because I'm not a cardiologist or an orthopedic surgeon. And so therefore,
Yeah.
I'm never going to have the real estate portfolio. I'm not the wealth builder. Like, that's not my identity. That is the second, probably
Yeah.
largest and most ingrained belief amongst six-figure earning medical professionals. Somehow it just feels like the wealth building stuff is always a little bit out of reach.
And you talk about some of these skills that you learned personally and you wrote about. And I wanted to talk about some of these skills. And I think student loans is another topic and a perfect place to start. And as we were saying, admittedly, our audience tends to be a little later in their financial journey. But I really appreciated your perspective because there's so much negativity and shame attached to student debt. And honestly, it's always bothered me because, I mean, they're the investment that made your high income career possible in the first place. So I think it's good debt. So, how do you think healthcare professionals should be thinking about student loans in a healthier and more productive way?
The very first step is the recognition of exactly what you said. That was the investment in you even having the job that you have. And so, like, you have to first just remove the shame and go, this was a tool. It would have been impossible for me to cash flow a $150,000 graduate degree. So this was a tool, and now I have the income. The next step is actually going, like, emotions aside, how is the best way to navigate this? For some people, that's going to be some type of forgiveness program, whether it's public service loan forgiveness, National Health Service Corps, or another one. For some people, that's a standard or accelerated payoff plan. And for some people, it is genuinely taxable loan forgiveness and taking the long approach and walking through that, 20 to 25 year path. But you have to make that decision only in light of the full plan. I think the biggest issue medical professionals face is taking the student loans, putting blinders on, and thinking about their student loan plan as though that's the money plan. Like, well, I don't like debt. I'm going to have it done in 4 years. That's the money plan. That's how I did it. The real genuine way to do it is to first go like, well, what's my financial independence timeline? Do I want to work full time till I'm 67? Am I trying to retire early? Am I trying to reduce hours early? Because those questions, that answers the student loan strategy or drives you in a direction. If you know, there's no way I'm working full time for 10 years, well, then maybe public service loan forgiveness isn't right. Right? If you know, hey, I want to be able to fully retire at 47. Okay, well, you better build a stack of assets and do it quickly. So you can't afford to spend 5 years only making student loan payments. You need to be investing. So it has to be a whole all-encompassing plan in order for it to make any sense. But because student loans are so emotional and there is so much shame and like burden associated with it, we all have this tendency to just laser focus on that. Plus, it's the part of money that we all conceptually understand, right? We know about interest. We know about monthly payments. The investing side is foreign. It's new. It's different. And so because it's not necessarily in our wheelhouse, we tend to put it on the back burner, ignore it, and all of our financial focus is here in the student loan debt arena. You do have to zoom out and really think about the whole plan as a cohesive unit.
Nice. I love it. I love that framework and the way to look at it. And I think it makes complete sense. And another section kind of I really connected with, you talk about numbers that we understand or don't understand, was your discussion around net worth and the numbers that everyone should know. One thing we do with our clients during our progress meeting is we will show them, Kristin, a lifetime visual of their net worth over their entire timeline with us. And in most cases, despite the market volatility, despite everything that happened in their life, it is always moving upward. And so what I think is really powerful about that is it helps people focus on the gain and not the gap in their life. So they stop obsessing over where they think they should be, or they're able to start recognizing the progress that they've actually made. And so I think that ties really well into the framework that you have around the 3 pillars. You say 1, make it, 2, multiply it, and 3, keep it. And what I like about that framework, again, is how simple you make it sound, but more importantly, how professionals that you work with are still struggle with it in real life. I mean, we all know people who are great at making money, but terrible at keeping it. Or we all know people who can invest well, but never actually enjoy their lives. So could you quickly walk us through the three pillars, and where do you most often see healthcare professionals or who you work with getting stuck?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, make it, multiply it, keep it is basically the process of tracking your earnings, maximize your earnings, tracking your investing rate, maximizing your investing rate, and then ultimately tracking your net worth to ensure that what you're doing, your efforts are actually moving the needle over time. I think the gap actually tends to be in all three for most medical professionals, and they're really starting out. Very few people track their earnings over time. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of medical professionals I talk to that don't even know their gross annual earnings. They only know like their take home pay on a
Mhm.
biweekly basis. And so, like tracking that, tracking
Gotcha.
income sources. And then my favorite way to do it is actually to categorize those income sources by the amount of time you spent per unit output so
Mhm.
that you have kind of passive income and one side of things, all the way up to like, hey, this is me fully at the hospital, kitted up in my scrubs, seeing patients. And then watch
Okay.
that trend over time where you see like, hey, I'm moving towards more of my income, moving towards not necessarily all passive, but more semi-passive things. Maybe it's portfolio income or rental income, and then watching it grow.
Right.
And then same thing with the investing rate. Like very few folks actually can answer the question, hey, what percent of your gross income did you invest last year?
Mm.
I mean, we ask medical professionals that question all the time, and maybe 5 every 6 months offhand know the answer. And so those two
Mhm.
things are really the thing that drives the third. So there's not a lot of point of checking your net worth if you're not doing the other stuff first, right? And
Mhm.
those gaps are
Mhm.
actually much bigger than I would like to admit for most medical professionals.
Let's talk about investing. So, as you can imagine, in my world, one of the things I'm constantly hammering all the time is that successful investing, frankly, should feel like a tree growing. It should be that boring. If you're doing it well, it should be very slow and steady and consistent over time.
Mhm.
And what I found fascinating about your story, and specifically to in investing in your experience and success with it, was that did not come from constantly watching the markets or trying to outsmart the system. In many ways, it came from you being just too busy living your life to interfere with the process. And frankly, that's a very counterintuitive lesson because, again, when it comes to money, we've been conditioned to think it's a math equation and that successful investing should feel active and complicated. Can you talk about that experience and what it taught you about investing and consistency?
Yeah, I'm so boring. I really am. Like my whole investment system is so boring. But that's what works. We practice a simple dollar cost averaging approach, and almost everything is invested for me personally outside of my kids' custodial Roth IRAs because their pay is variable. And so that's it.
Mhm.
Everything else is like automated purchase orders, so simple, so boring. I do nothing, and I check our asset allocation annually. I do like I'm a person who kind of I like to maybe meddle. I like to feel like I have something to work on. And so a lot of times like every year I'll have like one cash flow investing move that's the goal. And I'll put a lot of effort into learning, into due diligence, into all of that stuff. And that's like my focus where I'm maybe playing around a little bit. But like the core systems,
Yeah.
the thing that actually moved the needle for us over the long term was just being so boring and being consistent and using
Yeah.
automation and not touching stuff and just watching
Right.
it grow in the background, which I know sounds
Yeah.
very unsexy, but that's the truth.
And I think if I read correctly, I mean, your initiation to it wasn't it during COVID when we were obviously so busy with what's happening in the world? You in the medical profession were busy with work and just there were a lot heavier things to worry about. And you had started investing, and lo and behold, the market actually did very well during COVID. And you came out on the other side, and you're like, oh my gosh, look at this.
Yes. Before that,
That's
honestly, we had been investing, but really exclusively just in 401ks or Roth IRAs. And
mhm,
it wasn't something that we were really aggressively into. And then during COVID,
yeah.
it was like, well, I'm an ICU PA. We're in demand. And so instead of working less, I worked a lot more. And we had nothing to spend money on. I had been in the
Mm,
background kind of learning about investing. And it was like, well, okay, let's just do this. And so we started again,
Yeah.
like employing that dollar cost averaging approach, which was helpful because there was a lot of market volatility at the time, and just
Yep.
putting big sums of money on a weekly basis
Hmm.
into the market. And then when I looked up at the end, it was like, oh, okay, this stuff works.
Yeah. And in your conversations, millionaires in medicine, do you think people still overcomplicate investing?
I would say I think for most medical professionals, there is this fear of doing it wrong. And so there's a
Mm,
mental barrier to getting started outside of employer accounts. Like you open up a
yeah.
401k, you put money in, it's auto invested, it's easy. Now, it might be auto invested really
Yeah.
poorly, but you don't know that. And so you're like, cool, this is
Right.
happening. But then when you go to do anything outside of that, I think it's not even a wanting to overcomplicate it. It's almost a not knowing where to start. Then you freeze a little bit
Mm,
and then you just never get it done. And so if you don't
yeah.
have the ability to kind of just step forward and get started with some very simple processes, it can feel like a huge barrier.
I agree. Another interesting and also counterintuitive realities that we see with high income medical professionals, CRNAs, and nurse practitioners is that many of them actually will end up paying more in taxes during retirement than they did while they were working. And part of that reason, similarly, is we've been taught to defer taxes for as long as possible without really thinking through what happens later. And if you think about it, like you just said, we got the 401k, it's very easy to set up and we just put it in there. But we keep, in theory, kicking the tax bill down the road. And we're assuming that that's automatically the best strategy. But again, if all of your money is sitting in tax deferred accounts, the IRS in the future becomes your largest retirement partner. And what I appreciated about your discussion for the three tax buckets is that it reframes tax planning not just as a way to save money, but as a way to also create flexibility and, more importantly, I think, control later in life. Because obviously, when your assets are spread across the different buckets, you have more options. You have more control of your income, more control over your taxes, and ultimately more freedom when it gets to making work optional or retirement or whatever that might be. Can you walk us through the three tax buckets and explain for those who don't know how tax diversification kind of creates flexibility and peace of mind over time?
Yeah, so there's tax deferred, which is kind of what you're describing, like traditional 401k, 403b contributions. There's a tax free bucket that comes really from predominantly Roth, whether it's Roth 401k or Roth IRA contributions, or HSA, honestly, if you're doing it correctly in terms
Mm,
of qualified expenses on the back end. And then there's your after
yep.
tax bucket, which is in, your taxable brokerage account where you're facing capital gains. And if you have all three, you have these windows of opportunity for planning, right? Like maybe you retire early, you don't have an income yet, your RMDs haven't hit, and you have a 0% capital gains bracket. Well, that presents an opportunity to you, right? To do a whole variety of things. And so when you have all three buckets, you can sit with, maybe your financial planner and say, hey, what's the best withdrawal strategy here based on the age that I'm
Right.
retiring, based on what my RMDs are going to look like, based on my Medicare strategy? Like, what is the best way to pull to minimize the overall tax burden on this portfolio? If you have everything in a 401k, like you said, that's a lot trickier, right? There's not a lot of flexibility
Yep.
there. If you've made all
Yep.
traditional contributions, it's like, well, what are we going to do before these big RMDs hit and we're in a tax
Yep.
bracket that we maybe didn't anticipate?
I love it. This is somebody speaking my language. I love to hear other people talk about it. It's great. All right. Sorry, I'm a nerd. Last question on the
I love
book. So, if you see any of our content or something we always talk about is you'll see things say make work optional, pay less in taxes, and invest smarter. And really, the heart of what we do or what that's trying to say is what we call our nurse retirement system strategies. We are helping CRNAs and healthcare professionals figure out how to eventually turn all that retirement savings, all of that savings into a reliable paycheck because your paycheck from work is now gone.
Yep.
And at a high level, our framework is a three-step process. It's one, adopt a prudent investment allocation, two, maintain a cash war chest, and three, create a systematic withdrawal process. So I immediately connected in your chapter 10 when you introduced your work optional framework. And very similarly, it's 1, define your baseline, 2, future proof it, and 3, set up your withdrawal strategy. Can you, Kristen, kind of walk us through that framework and explain what making work optional truly means to you when you wrote that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, they have this idea of like, I want to retire at a certain age, early, on time, whatever, but there's no math behind like, well, what does it actually take? And so the very first thing is to actually look at your annual expenses and what you might reasonably try to replace in retirement. Now, for some expenses now, like let's say, you're 35 and you have 2 kids, you might have a big childcare expense that can go by the wayside, or a student loan payment or things like that. But I encourage people not to nickel and dime themselves here because I think a lot of folks have very little recognition of bigger expenses that are coming in the future that look quite different, whether it's additional help around the house, long-term care, additional medical costs, all of those things. So you need to pick a number that you think is reasonable to maintain your lifestyle. And then you have to, what I call future-proof it, meaning look at the genuine inflation that will occur between now and the year you start living off assets. Because almost all distribution strategies will take into account inflation from the index year that you retire until, death, right? Most of those strategies, that's built in. But what you have to look at is what's going to happen with inflation between now and then. If you're 55 retiring at 60, not that much. But if you're 28 retiring at 65, well, that's a lot of years of inflation. So in the book, I kind of talk through the different inflation rates you could use, but you'll have to pick something reasonable and go, okay, for whatever it costs me to create my life now, what's it going to cost to create the same life for me in 20, 30 years? At that point, you pick a withdrawal rate. Now, I go through in the book kind of the data behind it, but the classic old-fashioned rate to use is 4%. There's been some newer data on that. Some of the studies that they looked at to get that 4% were a touch outdated, maybe didn't have the same underlying assumptions as the classic investor now. We could really get into the weeds on that if we wanted, but you got to pick something.
That's nasty,
Yeah, you got to pick something. And let's say you picked 4% because it's easy, right? Then you would take your inflation adjusted number and you multiply by 25. All that's doing is rearranging the math equation. Now you have your nest egg goal. And that's across all accounts, but it scares people because it's always multiple millions. For people in our bracket, we're, CRNAs and NPs, PAs, it's always multiple millions. So they're like, oh my gosh, I have to be a multimillionaire. It's like, yeah, I named my business Millionaires in Medicine. It sounds aspirational, but it's kind of like the baseline for all of us to retire. We do actually have to become millionaires in medicine.
Yeah. And I remiss not to mention, it just eats away at me, the 4% rule, just for those who are listening. And I know Kristen might find this interesting or not. It's actually higher. We've been doing for over 12 years now, 5%.
Okay.
And the number is getting higher, and it's all relative, but it's higher than 4% in my belief. So yeah. But
which is helpful,
really cool.
right? That lowers what you need a little bit.
That's a big deal. Yeah. When
Yeah,
you're 4% versus 100%.
Yeah.
All right. So let's have a little fun. So all these strategies are good on paper and they make sense, but as you know, real life is usually messier than spreadsheets and that sort of thing. So I'd love to know, what's a financial mistake or season of life you struggled with personally, Kristen?
Oh, that's good. I've made so many mistakes. I think probably the biggest money mistakes I have made to date, where I actually lost capital, came in the realm of cash flow investing, not in the realm of stock bond investing. Of course, there's market volatility. My portfolio has gone down, but I was at least smart enough to stay the course and didn't sell. And so I've seen market recovery. Where I have made big mistakes have come in the realm of cash flow investing. And I honestly think I've had success there too, but I think a lot of that is it's a new skill set, and you have to approach any new investment asset class with the willingness to just learn due diligence from the ground up. And so I've made mistakes in that arena that are pretty nuanced, but they cost me money, and I've learned from them. But the only thing that I was able to salvage from that, really, outside of just the learning experience and the growth, was that I didn't bet the farm, right? I didn't go and buy a short-term rental with $50,000 to my name, so that if it didn't work, it didn't cash flow, I lost money. I was like, out,
Yeah.
out with nothing but a pot to pee in. I was at
Yeah.
least intentional about my overall asset allocation and made sure that those investment moves were a small percentage of portfolio so that in the event it went
Gotcha.
south, and I've had some go south, I was
Hmm.
not put in a position where I couldn't recover.
Gotcha. Smart. Good for you. Similarly, what's a financial hill that you would absolutely die on? Something you believe so strongly about that you'll defend it every single time, even if it's unpopular.
That's a good one. I do think probably it's that no one should do with their student loans what I did,
Yeah,
and focus
that's interesting.
entirely on student loan debt at the outset of career, recognizing that
Yeah.
we're all pretty late to the game of earning income by the nature of our training and really need to be investing from day one. So I think that's probably the hill I would die on. If you can't pay off your student loan debt in like less than a year, which very few of us can, you really should
Right.
employ a hybrid strategy and start investing from that very first paycheck.
So, Kristen, as we begin to wrap up and we look ahead, where is all this going? If we are sitting here 3 years from today, what has to have happened, whether personally or professionally, for you to feel genuinely happy and fulfilled with the progress that you have made?
That is the question I wrestle with every morning at 5 a.m. with my journal.
Okay.
I think you, from some of the words you've used, I think you have maybe read The Gap and the Gain. Have you read
Yes,
that book? Okay, so I
I
like
have. I am a
to.
strategic coach, this student. Yes.
Oh, you are
I'm a
excellent.
Dan
Okay,
Sullivan, I should say. Yes. Yes.
yeah, I'm a big Dan Sullivan fan too, and so,
Okay.
I think of it kind of through that lens. My goals are very, very large. There's 200,000 PAs, there's 500,000 NPs, there's 300,000 pharmacists, so that's about 1,000,000 folks. I would love to reach every one of
Mm-hmm.
them, but I also
Okay.
really try to practice that gap in the gain and, be content with my progress today where it's at, recognizing that we're still working towards those big aspirational goals.
Nice. Do you see yourself always practicing clinically in some capacity?
I think no. I think I have a mental map of maybe what that might look like, but I think from now on it'll just kind of be a continual slow march down in hours until I feel no
Mm,
longer fulfilled by the work. Right now, I will say I feel fulfilled by
gotcha.
the work, but I'm part-time, and I could see myself continuing to kind of slowly march that down, recognizing that if any point I'm like, "You know what? This doesn't move the joy needle for me anymore," that I would just phase out completely.
All right. Last question. If there's a CRNA or a PA or healthcare professional, anyone listening to this right now who feels financially overwhelmed or burned out or just behind, what's the first thing you would tell them to do this week to start moving towards a more financial freedom, work optional life?
Believe it or not, I would actually say, well, of course, I've gotta say pick up the book and, read the first
I
chapter.
love it.
Pick up the book and read the
Yeah.
first chapter. I talk about using a method that I stole from Byron Katie to kind of
Hmm.
walk through your limiting beliefs that you probably have rolling in your head about money. And if you did nothing else for 1 month, I would just do that. I would take a note in your phone, jot down every thought you have about money, and then in a quiet moment, sit with it and really dive into it and go, is it true? Does it serve me? Would I be better without this thought? And just start evaluating the way that you think when money gets brought up. That would actually probably do more for you in the long term than any like short term win would.
Kristen, thank you. I appreciate the work you're doing. I appreciate the honesty and practicality of the book. I appreciate you being on the show. I think this conversation will resonate with a lot of healthcare professionals. And so the book is the PA Millionaire Path. Kristen, where can people find the book, follow your work, and learn more about millionaires in medicine? And we will be sure to have everything in the show notes.
Thank you. So the book's on Amazon. If you just search the PA Millionaire Path, it will come up. We're also on Instagram at Millionaires in Medicine, and website is millionairesinmedicine.com. We try and keep it simple. There are lots of free resources, blog, and all sorts of stuff if you want to dive in.
Well, Kristen, thank you for being on this episode of Money RX for CRNAs and nurse practitioners, and we look forward to following your progress.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. This podcast does not engage in rendering legal, financial, or other professional